I don't know, he doesn't need any introductions among the academia in Europe and in India at large, those who are working on political philosophy and gender, caste, and especially on Tamil Buddhism. But I should say something about Dr. Gajendran. Dr. Gajendran has received his PhD in anthropology from Columbia University, and he has worked with Professor Nicholas Dirks, and his thesis title is Foundation of Anti-caste Consciousness, Pandit Ayyathurai, Tamil Buddhism and the Marginalized in South India. He was part of many prestigious institutes. He was also former alumni of JNU. He taught there for several years. He was there taught at Columbia University. He was also adjunct assistant professor at Hunter College, City University of New York. He was there at William Patterson University, New Jersey, and I told you about the JNU. Currently, he is associated with the Center for Modern Indian Studies, which is shortly called CIMIS, as a prestigious institute at University of Göttingen and Germany. He was also Ford Fellow, Lind Fellow at Columbia, and of course, he was a postdoctoral fellow at CIMIS Göttingen. His research interests are mainly in the anthropology and the history of South Asia, historical anthropology of Dalits and non-Dalits, subaltern religious movement in South Asia, comparative anthropology of caste and race. He is a trained anthropologist, political scientist, and his views on democracy, on social justice, on caste and race is absolutely well received among the academia in Europe and India. Dr. Gajendran has published many articles in various journals across the world, and one of his famous projects he is going to take up on basically on the idea of Tamil Buddhism and anti-caste project, anti-caste consciousness. His book is going to come up very soon. He has done also written a very excellent piece called African American Islam. It's a long way back in 2011, I guess. And he has written extensively on colonialism, caste, gender, emergence of critical caste feminism. His contributions towards Tamil Buddhist critique of caste and patriarchy is well received. With these few words, and today's lecture will be chaired by Dr. Musharraf Hossain Khan. And just let me say brief about Dr. Khan. Musharraf was assistant professor at Jindal Global Law School at Haryana. He did his master's from University of Hyderabad. Later he received his PhD from New York University, the Department of English, on South Asian literature, largely literature and culture. His research interests are South Asian literature and cultures, post-colonial theory, theory of everyday life, religion and secularism, Bengali partisans fictions. He is also founding editor of a very famous, actually famous in a sense that is gives space to all young academics and scholars, the journal called Cafe Dissensus. He has also widely published numerous articles in different journals. Dr. Musharraf Da, along with Dr. Murshid Alam, they are jointly editing a very good volume, and which is supposed to come very soon, the title on Muslim life in West Bengal. With these few words, I will request Dr. Musharraf Da to proceed today's program. And the title of today's program is, as you all know, the critique of race, racism and its relevance to India. Thank you.
Thank you, Motin, so much for inviting me. And we have a very distinguished guest today. So as I said before, we are the big players in this. We are just, we have visiting appearances. But before giving the stage to Professor Gajendran Ayyathurai, I would just like to, I'm anticipating certain things from this lecture because I just don't know what it entails exactly. But as I remember, the World Conference Against Racism in 2001, the Durban one, where the Durban Conference in South Africa, in fact, is the first one where the National Campaign on Dalit Human Rights had tried to equate caste with race. But the Indian government at that time had protested. They didn't agree to it for obvious reasons. We understand that race is a very Western concept. It doesn't apply exactly to the Indian context. So, but I'm looking forward to this lecture because I think the time has come to take, caste from its very local rootedness, the way we understand it, and make it an international problematic, because it has to connect somewhere with the larger movements against discrimination, like racism and other forms of movement. So that's one aspect. And I need not say that caste is probably the most important problematic of Indian society at this very moment, with things that are happening, or have happened in last few decades. I need not say that if we need to analyze the stratification of Indian society, I think more than religion, it's caste, as a category that we need to understand and analyze. Because if we can erase the hierarchy, eradicate the hierarchy, or understand that how that hierarchy is created between different castes, I think the problem of communalism could also be solved. I bring in the issue of communalism because base is, a body which is mostly sort of composed of Bengali Muslims. So if we have to understand communalism, understanding of caste is crucial, and it is the central problematic. So without much ado now, I would request Dr. Gajendran Ayyathurai, who is a distinguished academic, as Motin has already said. I need not say anything more. I would welcome you to deliver your lecture. Please.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Not very often one gets to speak on a theme that is very close to one's mind and heart. And I think today's theme it's one of those important occasions for me. Thinking about the critique of race stroke racism. For me, both race and racism are the same. So this wouldn't be possible had there not been the invitation from Abdul Mateen. So Abdul was always, he was visiting our center a few years ago as a doctoral scholar, and he left a very big impact on most of us, through his presentations and interactions. And one of the things that I remember from him is always him talking in the way like, sir, we should think about this issue this way. And our issues, this is our commitment, that kind of thing, that we feeling that our attitude in Dr. Abdul Mateen was extremely impressive for me. And I could see the warmth, the collective energy that he was always generating with almost all of us. All of us means Americans, Germans, and other Europeans and Indians, that way. So that when he contacted me for this talk, I immediately consented, and I said, Abdul, in honor of you, I'm going to do it. So that's how I'm here. So I thank Abdul for this invitation and arranging and contacting people and circulating the message about the talk and so on. So I thank you, Abdul, in a big way. Secondly, I also thank Professor Mashraf Khan for taking his time and being part of this discussion. And I appreciate you for your introduction. I would like to know more about your work and literature and everyday life of communities in India, and particularly Muslims. And I want to connect the two in a way. About citizenship and all that I'm thinking about. So that way, I think your work is very important. I would like to get to know more about it in the future. So thank you for your participation too, sir. I appreciate. Good. So now I'm going to upload my PowerPoint. This is the plan. I know there are some students here, and maybe I would recommend you, noting down some of the names and themes that I may say, which might interest you in the future for your own research. So that is one. And if it is not possible, it's okay. You can just listen to me. So I'm going to have a PowerPoint. I have a few slides and pictures. Have a look at them, and I would love to invite your questions after my talk. So let's say I'm probably 45 to 50 minutes, and I would like to talk, and hopefully I don't go over beyond that. And that's my plan. And secondly, let me get into the theme. Why did I choose this theme to speak on? And of course, is connected with George Floyd's death and what's happening in the US. By the way, still there are many cities in the US where the protests are on. For example, Portland. For more than 50 days, people are protesting. And the police brutality is on. And Trump is sending more police force. And yet people are resisting various governments that are not compromising on the race and racist attitude. And the people who are protesting are not just African Americans. Many whites, South Americans and Indians, hopefully some Indians, I'm not fully sure, but definitely whites and South Americans and African Americans have come together to fight and challenge the race and racism in the US. That's remarkable. So, and then I thought about it, does it have, and then, some people are shedding tears in India, some people don't, many of us don't even care. Is it right? So is there any connection between race and we, the Indians? And so is there any connection? That's a question that I'm grappling with. And yes, there is. And so I'm going to, in fact, most of the time I'm going to spend my time, my details are going to be on America, historical aspects, anthropological aspects, and religious aspects. Treat my explanations as a kind of a metaphor. It's a kind of a metaphor to understand India. And then the last part, I'm going to connect with India and then end my talk. So that is the kind of a plan. Here is my PowerPoint. This slide, I'm talking about generally the history of race and racism in the US. So as we know, Christopher Columbus was an Italian, and with the support of the Spanish king, he embarked on the so-called trip to reach India, because in the medieval time, India was a very prosperous country. We are talking about the 15th century. Okay, so Christopher Columbus set out from Barcelona. I was there a couple of years ago, and then there is a memorial and a big statue for Columbus right on the coast, on the beach, from where he departed from Spain. So he set out to come to India, but in between, he had a misunderstanding about the geography of India and so on. So instead, he landed up in the Caribbean. So he assumed it to be India, but anyway. So first the Caribbean he entered, and then soon at the time, most of the Caribbean islands were who were the natives? They were called Caribs. So soon they were all wiped out, and then more so-called explorations came from Europe, from Spain, and others also got inspired, Portuguese and so on. So Caribbean island, and then Christopher Columbus went all along the coast of South America. Now, that's how, in a way, the European colonialism began. And with that, we find racism also. And by the way, when Columbus was getting back to Spain and elsewhere, he forcibly took some people from the Caribbean. So literally, that was the beginning of, race-based capture of people and getting them over to Europe. So that began, and 1492 was the time when Christopher Columbus landed up in the Caribbean. So we also have a famous movie called 1492. Have a look at it. It'll be interesting. Just, of course, we have to have a critical view of that movie too. Anyway, so European colonization began with what happens is, colonization of, as I said, the body, and then, land and mind. And so it began with the body of people being taken out, and because they were considered as less human than the Europeans. And so they were taken out and taken back to Europe. By the way, some Indians were also taken as slaves by the early 17th century from places like Chennai, and they were sold in Europe. So that is a history we don't know much about. We have to explore. But there are clear evidences of Indians, children being taken and being sold in Europe. So that's all this. So first, body was capturing the body and of non-Europeans was the motive. And then with that, once you and then the land and all that were taken out and occupied and colonized. And then this would not have happened further had there not been colonization of the mind. So that also happened through some racist interpretations. So in a way, we find from the 15th century or a little earlier too, the idea of race shaping up. And the idea was not to treat every community across the world equally, but to elevate the Europeans, white Europeans to a higher level and putting down everybody else on a lower level. And then among the people, the Africans were underestimated as the worst set of humans. And therefore they suffer the most. More than 11 million Africans were taken out and they were enslaved. So the first evidence of Africans, enslaved Africans that were brought to US, the first evidence was in Virginia, 1619, as I say in this slide. So from then onwards, you have this slavery emerging, and the first African slaves land up in Africa, 1619. They're forcibly brought, and on Virginia they were settled. And then you have, why were they brought to America? Basically for plantation work, to plant cotton, to plant sugar, and then tea and coffee. So basically, the slavery began for plantation work. That's why they were called plantation colonies. This is the time when sugar became very famous, particularly refined sugar. Tea and coffee also became very famous. So, of course, we have a long history of tea in China for centuries. But it is in modern time, particularly from the 16th, 17th century, tea and coffee became famous, and Europeans wanted to make maximum money out of that. And then they needed labor, right, to make many lands ready for such cultivation. Therefore, for the labor's sake, Africans were brought in. They would not come, very easily, so they were forcibly brought in. And then, so in a way, you find, like I write here, Christianity also was used to justify racism, that white Christians were better humans than others, and other religions were put down as heathens and heathenism and so on. So modernity, even though it began, like certain philosophers like Descartes talked about mind and body. In a way, the Cartesian theorem comes from Descartes. So Descartes very clearly said, every human can think. This famous quote we know, I think, therefore I am. So that is what opened up modernity. That means every human can use one's reason to be creative. So that's a great development, but that was also hijacked to justify only the white Europeans can be modern. All others are primitive. So that kind of attitude emerged. So, and like I say in the last point, European and American scientific racism, look at this, science was mobilized to justify racism. So all this happened via the academy. So we have Oxford, we have Cambridge, started in the medieval age, Harvard from the early 17th century. Many of these universities like Harvard, Columbia, they were all having major professors who were writing and justifying racism. That is, the world is meant for the white Europeans, and they should be, they are closer to God, and everybody else is secondary, and Muslims and whatever religions across the world, they were all put in the second pedestal. So that way, the scientific racism and scientific racism led to humans being reduced as property. So Africans were considered as property, and they were not humans. So you can bring the goods from Africa, like the various goods. Africans were also considered as yet another good, yet another material object. So they were reduced, as I say, as property. For a long time, this happened. Africans were only looked at as property. You can buy and sell them, like you buy a cattle. So this whole scientific racism happened in a way, and they were called servants. When you have a white European as a person to help you, that person was called a help, whereas the Africans were reduced as servants. So servants is an insulting term, and we should all think about it, and we shouldn't be using it back in our own country in India. So so that is one thing. And let's move to the next slide, please. Yeah, so this is how they were brought. This is the ship, and then imagine they were packed like this, very close. They were tied so that they would not be able to resist. This is a whole aerial view of a ship, and you would see at the end of the slide, I have the cross-sectional view of the ship. So people were stacked like that. They couldn't pee, they couldn't go to, defecate. Many of them did in the same spot, because if you let them go, they may escape, they may fight. So they were tied. So this is how they were brought. So many died. We only know 11 million Africans were brought in. How many died? How many were thrown in the sea? We do not know. So this is a ship, slave ship. Please keep this picture in mind. And this is how they were brought. Our own fellow humans from Africa were brought like this to America and to Europe, and they were sold as property. Let's go to the next slide, please. Here you find some Africans were not keeping quiet. They were against slavery. Every human would not accept to be a slave. They would resist, and they resisted even in the ship. So when they did that, what happened to those Africans who were resisting to be human, saying that, no, I have to pee this way, I have to eat this way, I have to live this way, you can't tie me, and so on. And they were saying that was not tolerated. And so what happened? They were thrown, as I show in this picture, they were literally thrown in the sea to die. You see, some of them are trying to swim, and they could not climb into the ship back, so many died. So millions died in the sea. Please keep that in mind. And let's go to the next slide, please. And so, so basically what I find is through this process, humanity was denied. So they were brought to America, and they were forced, they were treated as property, bought and sold. What else happened? This is very important. Like I said in the introduction, keep this as a metaphor to understand what was going on in a way to the situation in India. Whether such a things are happening in India, were happening in India in the ancient time or medieval or modern, I want you to keep this at the back of your mind. So what I say as a metaphor to understand India. So the Africans were brought as slaves, as property in the US. And then what happened? Of course, people were resisting. Even many of their own relatives died during the voyage, but yet the Africans did not keep quiet. They were continuing to resist race and racism, then being treated as property, being sold along with the cattle and so on land. So you have this, what are the ways by which these Africans who were enslaved and bought and sold in the US, did they go through more pains, more suffering? Yes, they did. This is what happened. Lynching is a word that some of you that you may not know. Now you know. Lynching. Lynching means killing somebody in public. How do you do that? You take a person, you put a noose, and then put him or her there around the neck and just bring and pull him up and kill. And that happened. So lynching is always connected with the word that I use, noose. So this was a public humiliation. And so as the Africans who were brought in as slaves and sold as property and so on, they were not keeping quiet. They were continuously, they were resisting. So, and they were also finding liberty and asked for more freedom and so on. Those demands were not to be given. So one of the first organizations that came about in the US to kill, to terrorize the African Americans who were already enslaved was called Ku Klux Klan. So some historians say it began in 1866 in Tennessee. Some say a little earlier in the southern part of the US. We'll keep it as 1865 and 66. Ku Klux Klan emerged. So what did they do? So basically bodily violence. So whenever there is a group of people asking, Africans ask for, when they ask for more freedom, to be with their family, to eat well, to whatever decently to be treated, that was not to be tolerated. So they were attacked. So violence and bodily humiliation happened. And so that is one physical form. So lynching continued. So we don't even know how many thousands and millions were killed in the US after their arrival in the name of lynching and through noose. So that is one. And then this is one direct physical violence on Africans that was sweeping, since their arrival in the early 17th century. It was peaking all along, right up to the 19th century. Has it come to an end now? George Floyd died, and we know it has not come to an end. So it has taken a different form. So that is one physical bodily violence. The other side is this. There were also the white men also indulged in humiliating the African Americans. And so they had something called blackface minstrel shows. So blackface minstrel shows means, the white guys, they wanted to humiliate the Africans, as say, for example, calling them monkeys and so on. So the white guys would take grease or take charcoal, apply on their face, darken themselves, and do funny things that the Africans were not doing. So basically, they say this is how Africans live, African slaves live, like that. A white guy would paint and do all possible funny things, and the white people will sit around and laugh at the Africans who were enslaved. So that show was called blackface minstrel shows. And that was started by a white guy called Thomas Dartmouth Rice. And he called himself as Jim Crow. I'm going to say why he called himself as Jim Crow and what happened later on in another slide. And as of now noted, the word Jim Crow comes from the white man called Thomas Dartmouth Rice, who painted his face like an African, dressed himself in a funny way, and humiliated African Americans or Africans. This is one say. So you have a bodily violence, and then this kind of minstrel shows by white people to humiliate the Africans. So this went on. And I have a word called skinning. This I thought I will just share with you. What do I mean? In the 18th century, the most famous place for medicine was Scotland. That's where the first syringes, needles, all of them were designed. So I'd gone to Scotland, Edinburgh University for talks and so on. I went to the museum to see these medical apparatus. They're all that, the first needle, first syringe, the first gloves, all of them are there. Now, first scissor that was used on human body, all of them are there in the Royal Society for Physicians and so on. Anyway, so white Americans went to Scotland in the early 18th century. They got trained right up to the end of 19th century. They got trained, came back to America and established hospitals and so on. One doctor got back from Scotland and suddenly he got an idea. Hey, these guys' African skin must be really good, like cattle. So why can't I make a bag? So a white American who had a degree from medicine from Scotland, skinned a black man, dried his skin and made a bag, and he put his doctoral materials on, went to his office daily. Imagine the cruelty. That's why I have this word skinning. So these were the atrocious things the white men in America did in the name of race and race. They didn't even care for the human body. So they killed, skinned, and did all possible nonsense. And of course, sexual violence. Sexual violence was horrible on women. Families were destroyed. They didn't care for who this woman is. They did everything and possible. Children were born. And so once one white man's children that were born were also sold. Imagine me selling my own child, that kind of thing. So that went on. All kinds of, so then some of the presidents, US presidents, after becoming an American president, like Trump, in their residences had women, concubines. They were Africans. So they had sexual relationship with African women in their own residence. That is presidential residence. It could be White House. By the way, White House built by black people in a big way. So there, presidents kept African women and exploited them sexually. Children were born. Thomas Jefferson was one of the guys, one of the presidents. He was the president of Trump. He was the third president. And one of the women he exploited her name was Sally Hemings. So Sally Hemings had children. Whose children? President Thomas Jefferson's children. And that guy never recognized those children as his own. Thankfully, there was one guy, an opposition, a white politician who was in the opposition, or who broke away from Thomas Jefferson, wrote in 1802 about Thomas Jefferson's sexual relationship with Sally Hemings and how children were born. All this was out. It isn't, and 1802 it was written. That's how the world came to know that there was a white president. I mean, the American president was sexually exploiting African women in the US at the time. So if the president does, you can imagine whole lot of other Americans, white Americans, what would they have done? On the one hand, you have American Declaration, saying that, rights of men. This rights of men literally meant rights of white men, period. Nobody else could join in that set of rights. So we know that from Jefferson, that wasn't the case. Let's go to the next slide, brother. Yeah. So I have some pictures. Look at this. This was lynching. So this was a family event. And I want you to watch carefully the picture. Look at the smile of a person and somebody showing the hand, how the Africans were killed. So they were killed, and they were hanged on tree branches or lampposts and so on. It was a family. And watch this picture. Women are there. We don't know whether they were happy, but they were meant to be there as a family event. Mark my phrase. So killing an African slave was a family event. And what all they did, and I have some, I wanted to let you know some, some 7-8 points on a lynching. What did they do? Photographers were called to take pictures like this. So it was a kind of imagine the cruelty of you kill an African, a fellow human, and you call photographers to take pictures. And it was like a festive moment for the whole family. It's like we going for a picnic. Hey, Africans, they're going to kill. Let's go and see. Like that they went. And it was trains, special trains were set to take people to witness. So sometimes 10,000 people gathered to enjoy the killing of an African. See the cruelty. Not many people know. So like I said, more than 10,000 people traveled to this place to watch a killing event like this. And then so many years after the death of this African-American brothers, their shirt, their skin, their hair, they were all taken as souvenirs. They were sold in museums. So they were sold for many years. So people, white guys, very happily, I bought the skin, a piece of skin or piece of dress of a fellow who was lynched in that area. It's a very precious thing. Like that, they were celebrating the souvenirs of the African-American brothers and sisters who were killed and museumized. So, and then of course, postcards were made like this. Imagine me sending this as a postcard to somebody, how racist I would be to do this. So that's one. And then music was composed to celebrate this kind of a killing. So music would be going on. Somebody would be killing an African-American. These are all from the history books I'm sharing, by the way. It's not my own interpretation. And then, of course, sexual mutilation. That means they will kill a man, go cut his pant, cut his penis, and then show, hey, look at this African penis or something. So that's sexual mutilation. Historians use this phrase, sexual mutilation. Like we say, a woman's breast was cut, or her bottom was cut, a man's bottom was cut, and insulted. This is all part of America's history. Please note that. So it was basically, they were creating a white nation like this, mutilation of bodies. And this has to be written a lot. Those of you interested, read more and connect it with India. Do we do this or not? I'm going to show some slides about what is happening in India. Don't be surprised. So hold on. So that way, lynching is a horrible event that was glorified as a family celebration and excursion. Let's go to the next slide, please. So you look at this picture, a man is kicked. And this guy there's one guy posing here, showing his body and heroically standing, right? Is this the way to do it? Look at the bodily violence, and there is somebody smiling and injuring and killing. Probably this brother would have died. So this is advertising lynching. This was going on. Let's go to the next slide, please. Keep this slide in mind. We are going to talk about our Indian situation also in comparison. This is news. So when an African community was trying to resist racism, trying to raise, look, give us more salary, treat us in a human way. When they said that, that was considered as a rebellion. And therefore, white folks, this is a Ku Klux Klan guy. They would dress up like this. It's very scary to look at. Watch his face. He's hooded. This is a Ku Klux Klan symbol. And this is news. They would come and threaten, hey, we are going to come and kill you all, noose you all, hang you all, lynch you all. Like that they warned, they did not stop there. They went and actually killed people. Let's move to the next slide, please. Okay, this is a minstrel's show. I said Thomas Rice, Thomas Dartmouth Rice. This is a white man. He painted his face, he dressed up clownish, and he was insulting African Americans with this kind of a show. This is called Jim. His name was Jim Crow. I mean, the Thomas Rice, or the white guy, named himself as Jim Crow. Look at the name, Jim Crow, just to insult Africans. Let's go to the next one, please. So this was a man. Look at the way he is painted. This is some minstrel guy. This is not Rice, somebody else. White on black. Way back while I was teaching at JNU in the 90s, I used a book on race, teaching racism then. I used a book called White on Black by Peter Naravin Peters. So that's the title of a book, White on Black. It has pictures and so on. So this picture, watch, this white guy painted himself like this. Is this the way Africans look? Look at the humiliation. It's like a, some red mark. Do they look like this? And this is a nice white man, very well combed, oiled, nicely dressed up. Whereas an African American is a joke. He's not a human. That's how they were insulting. So the word minstrel and so on. Let's go. So Jubilee, please keep this word in Jubilee. We'll come to that. Yeah. Rise of the oppressed. With all this humiliation, that is the power of human resistance. Any human who's violated will not keep quiet. You insult him or her in the name of race, they will not keep quiet. They will resist. And that's what they did too, rise of the oppressed. So rebellions happened repeatedly. So one of the powerful figures I'm going to share with you, there were many, I'm picking up one, Nat Turner. Nat Turner lived between 1880 and 1831. So he sort of rebelled on August 21, along with his friends. They attacked plantation owners, white guys. One data shows him along with many others, I think his whole group killed literally more than 60 white guys, planters. They did that. Interestingly, Nat Turner himself killed or not is debated. It's not fully sure, but many of his whole group did that. But the point is, there is a limit to human tolerance. If somebody kicks, the other person would kick back. That's the moral of the story. They did it. Nat Turner, but eventually Nat Turner was caught. And you know what? These three words keep in mind and connected with India too, if at all is relevant. Hanged. So Nat Turner was caught on November 11th, 1831. He was hanged. And after hanging, what happened? You have, his stomach was cut and intestines were taken out. So that is called drawn. You draw the intestines out, hanged and drawn and quartered. They did not stop with that. You've taken the intestines out. Do you keep quiet? No. The legs were cut, arms were cut. It's called quartered. So these are the three things very important for us to know how the African Americans were humiliated and mutilated. So, but they resisted everyday forms, and so they resisted. Apart from this major rebellions through arms and so on, many of them also did what is called everyday forms of resistance. That's James Scott. He teaches at Yale University. Some of you might know. So every day people were resisting. They would not come on time. They would destroy the crops. They would kill the animals of a planter. They would not let the crops decay. All these are the forms they were resisting, because the fellow is exploiting me as a slave. What would I do? So I wanted that guy to suffer. That's how they kind of resisted. There are very many forms of everyday resistance, everyday forms of resistance. So And then many, of course, reconciled also. This is our situation. What do we do? They adjusted, suffered bodily, got mutilated, and died horribly. So all these things happened. And so, like I said, and apart from this, you will be surprised to know, even in the mid-19th century, you have some of the African Americans were doctors and artists. Somehow they could study, they could figure out. And somehow in the 1850s, they could also travel to Europe. This I got to know reading from an African American writer about whom I'm going to say, W.E.B. Du Bois. His work, Black Reconstruction, is a powerful book. There he talks about painters traveling to Europe, African Americans traveling to Europe, displaying their paintings, performing music shows, but not the kind of minstrel shows, other decent, playing different musical instruments, and they were doctors and so on. This is also a history we don't know. So how did they become doctors? How did they become doctors? And how did they become painters? How did they become musicians and so on? We are yet to know about the whole history. Now, women were also very exemplary people. They were, particularly African Americans, families were protected in a big way through the women folk. Many African American women, the grandmothers, mothers, somehow tried to protect their partners, husbands, and children. Their histories are slowly we are getting to know more, but a lot more work to be done. Let's go to the next slide, please. Yeah, this is Nat Turner, who lived between 1880 and 1831. And this was a moment of, there's a picture in the background, a white man finally located him in a bush, and he had his knife and so on. He surrendered, seeing the many others with guns and so on. So this is Nat Turner. Let's go to the next one, please. Next slide, yeah. So you have then, so something happened, something in US happened called Civil War. So this happened between, like I say, 1861 and 1865. So what is Civil War? Basically, the southern states, around 11 states in America, they said we want to be independent countries, and the northern part didn't want them to break away. So there was a war between the northern America and southern America within the USA. So that is Civil War. So basically it's a white man's war, in my opinion, okay? And they knew the North would not be able to win the South, but for one thing. That is, if the African Americans were given guns, if they were trained as soldiers, the possibility of North winning over the southern states was more. So Abraham Lincoln thought about it. And so he immediately said, great, let's liberate the African Americans so that we will have more soldiers, so that we can fight and win the southern states. That was Abraham Lincoln's logic. So, so that way we have the story that, we know Abraham Lincoln was, was he genuinely interested in the emancipation of African Americans? Yes and no. So January 1st, 1863 was his declaration of, emancipation. So on Jan 1st, to repeat, Jan 1st, 1863, Lincoln said, hereafter no more slavery, emancipation for all African Americans. When that happened, that was amazing. So African Americans joined the northern military and took up arms and so on, joined, and eventually the southern states were subdued. So definitely without African Americans soldiers, the North would not have won the war against the South. So that has to be kept in mind. So in a way, so one historian says Abraham Lincoln was still, after all, a white man's president. So he was not an African American president, or he was not for African Americans. So we must keep in mind. So that's one way we need to demystify Abraham Lincoln. So that's one side. So for this blacks' help, apart from this emancipation on Jan 1st, 1863, there are new amendments that came about. So you have 13th Amendment, which made no more slavery in America. They said very clearly from 1865. And then the citizenship, all the African Americans were considered citizens from 1868. And then the voting right was given through 15th Amendment in 1870. So these three amendments are very important for African Americans, 13th, 14th, 15th. So no more slavery, citizenship, and voting right. So with all this, after the Civil War, after all the suffering, thankfully, there were some good white men and women who really felt, yes, African Americans should be liberated. That's a very important point. At least through this war, through the genuine commitment of the African Americans, some white men and women changed their mind about slavery. Of course, majority of them did not. So these some men were genuinely for what is called reconstruction. But reconstruction literally meant, reconstructing the physical structures of America. It was not to equally build African Americans. The property, African American property, did not become full humans yet. So that's a sad part of reconstruction. But the African Americans thought it's a jubilation. That's why they call it Jubilee. Jubilee, they meant, oh, we've been liberated. It's a jubilation. So that's how they felt. And then they were promised, because they were enslaved, because they fought in the war and helped the North to win. You know what they were promised? They were promised 40 acres. That means every African American will get 40 acres. And the mule. Mule is an animal which is a cross between donkey and horse. So mule was used to plow the land. So every African American was promised 40 acres way back in the 1860s onwards. But this promise was never fulfilled. They were cheated. Okay, they remain unpaid. So they were probably tempted, okay, 40 acres they will give or something like that. They tricked them. It was never given to them at all. So we also have in India land reforms. Has it really happened? I leave it to you to think about it. So apart from this unpaid 40 acres and a mule, they also came up with black coats. That means the war was won, everything. Then what happened? The white guys, majority of them, did not keep quiet. They wanted to reimpose race and racism. So they came up with what is called black coats. And the black coats meant the African Americans can only work in that zone. That means imagine a slum. You should not get out of slum. You should only be in a slum, in a ghetto. You cannot take up certain jobs. You cannot get educated. You cannot get married and establish a family. All these are part of the black coats. So it went on and on and on. And then remember the word Jim Crow? That guy Rice who was acting funny and humiliated African Americans. So his name was used to bring back some laws, Jim Crow laws. That means insulting black African Americans again. So the Jim Crow laws came into being from 1865, basically to put back the freed humans. I use the word freed humans. Usually they use the word freed men. I'm not using that word. Instead, I'm saying because there were women too. So I'm using the word freed humans were brought back into Jim Crow laws. And that means they were re-enslaved. So imagine you were called a slave till yesterday. Today I wanted to win a war, so I used you as an equal citizen. I gave you the gun to fight with me. And tomorrow, today we won the war. Tomorrow I say, hey, go back to your slavery. That's how they were cheated. So Jim Crow, black coats and Jim Crow laws were brought back after the Civil War to put down the African Americans. And that continued. I use the word evisceration. Evisceration means taking out the interest and so on. That's one side. But the metaphoric meaning is that humiliation, insult, subduing. So no wonder George Floyd died a few days ago. So a white man put his knee in the neck of George Floyd. We know that close to 9 minutes, and the white man put his hands in his own pocket and happily standing on the neck of a fellow human. Animals don't do that. A white man did it. That means what happened in 1619, when the Africans arrived when they were forced as enslaved and brought back in 1619 in Virginia, happened in the 18th century, happened in the 19th century. It is happening now in the 21st century. In the killings that we see today, even after George Floyd was killed. So it's race and racism is alive and well in America. Next slide, please. Yeah, so in spite of this, we have still the resilience of the oppressed. You do whatever you want. However, the centuries of race and racism, African Americans thrived. They have their own knowledge. Usually the African Americans, the moment I drop the word, you think of the black, when I say the word black, what do you think? You think about Michael Jackson, right? You talk about some musicians. Please don't insult them with that kind of an understanding. They have been, like I said, doctors, engineers. White House was constructed by African Americans. The Wall Street, which controls the whole world economy, billionaires, multi-billionaires are there in Wall Street. I've been in that in Wall Street. Professor Khan also would have gone. It was built by African Americans. Even now, you can't see one, probably, I think I remember reading one or two black billionaires, but mostly it's white men controlling the Wall Street. So all this is there, but somehow these African Americans have thrived in their own way through their knowledge, through the drum, through the music and dance. So you take the African Americans out of America, what is there? Is there anything good? I don't think so. I don't think so. So multiple ways they have American identity, American culture is deeply, deeply indebted to African Americans after all the humiliation, after all the evisceration that they've gone through. So do we have such communities in India? We'll talk about that a little later. So they thrived like that. And now we have, and then of course Harlem. Harlem is a small place in New York where I lived. That's where my son was born. I chose to live in Harlem to be part of them and to understand, to be part of African Americans, to learn as much as possible from them. That was a beautiful time of my life. So you have Harlem. There you find in the early 20th century, that is around from 1910 and so on, amazing artists, painters, singers, writers just bust out in America from Harlem, New York. So they used the English language, they used the dress form of Europeans and others, their tools to create many multiple things that were so liberating to them, as well as contributing to other communities of the world. So, for example, there was a guy called Marcus Garvey. I read about him. I wrote it in my own mother tongue, Tamil, and English too, and I'm planning to publish more on Marcus Garvey. This guy was from Jamaica originally, but he came to US in 1916. And so Marcus Garvey came up with a phrase called "Black is beautiful." He wanted to treat Africans in a very dignified way. So he coined the phrase "Black is beautiful." And of course, others also followed it up. And he created this UNA, stands for United Negro Improvement Association. So all this he started, and then BSL stands for Black Star Line. So he had a ship that was traveling between West Indies and America to sell things and buy things. All these he tried to make African Americans, as business-oriented people, as educated people, as much they can through their own efforts. So this was happening in a big way. That is one set of Marcus Garvey. Please keep in mind. And then this Nation of Islam was a fantastic event. So I've written about it in Tamil and English, and I want to write about a guy called Malcolm X. If at all I have to choose some 2-3 important African American leaders, definitely Malcolm X in the top 1 or 2. Amazing man. So he changed his name X because usually when the slaves were brought in, their original names were removed. They did not care. If I am the plantation owner, my name was put on the slave that I would own. So many slaves carried the names of the planters, the white men who were owning them. So Malcolm X questioned, I will not do that. I don't even know who my great-great-great-parents were. Where did I come from? So I call myself X. That's how he named himself, Malcolm X. There's a movie that Spike Lee produced in 1992, Spike Lee. So have a look at it. It's called Malcolm X. Powerful movie. Malcolm X came. He was part of what is the movement called Nation of Islam. And, of course, there was one called Elijah Muhammad who started this Nation of Islam movement in America. So he interpreted Africans were originally Muslims. And that's how they did it. Most of them came from West Africa, from Senegal, from Ghana, where they were original Muslims, probably from Muhammad's time. So that's how they interpreted. We belong to the Nation of Islam. We were enslaved. Now we are in America. We still belong to the Nation of Islam. That's how they spoke. And they were extraordinary. They didn't know Urdu or Arabic, nothing, English. And they were bulldozing their way as Muslims. Malcolm X was the most powerful leader of this group. And of course, he was shot dead. Of course, how such a person would be allowed to live? He was shot dead. Been to this area, a place where he was killed and so on. I'll show his picture a little later. Sojourner Truth was an African American lady. This happened. In 1851. There was a meeting in Ohio conducted by the white women. They wanted to talk about women's rights. So who had gathered? Only white women. They were all there. So suddenly a person entered the hall, an African American woman. So all the white women froze. Whoa, what is this woman doing here? An African American woman, a slave woman entering our women's meeting? So they went quiet. They were in a shock. Thankfully, they did not expel her out. She was sitting in a corner. So after all the white women spoke, this madam stood, Sojourner Truth, and began the speech by saying, sisters. She used the word sisters. So the moment I read this, I cried when I was reading many years ago. Here is a woman who was humiliated as a slave woman, and she enters into a women's meeting where only the white women were there. And this enslaved woman begins by talking sisters. That's the kind of sisterhood she had. She spoke, and that was the title, Am I Not a Woman? That's what she asked to that women. That means the white women themselves were racist. So Sojourner Truth asked the question, am I not a woman for you women? Like that she spoke, she became famous, and she organized. Imagine she had 13 children. Every one of her child was sold. So she didn't know where her husband was, where her children went. Imagine many of us going through that kind of a pain, our brothers and sisters being sold, and we being sold. So I think we need to connect like that. Then Harriet Tubman was another lady. She established what is called underground railroads. It's not simply a railroad. It's a metaphor. That means many African Americans from the South escaped into North and then into Canada through what is called safe houses. So there were safe homes where progressive white and African Americans had a house. In that, the escaping African Americans can go and hide. They were called safe homes. So that is called underground railroad. It's literally, they were saying like, there is a railroad underground. There was nothing underground. There was no railroad. People escaped, stayed in some safe homes, and escaped into in Canada and so on. So that is what Harriet Tubman did. She established underground railroads for people to escape. So, and then of course, anti-race women and white women were there, and men were there. One of the ladies that I read about was Catherine Impey. So Catherine Impey, imagine, published a magazine called Anti-caste. So this was published. We, the Indians, our distinguished nationalists, all those fellows we have had in India from colonial times, never cared to establish a magazine called Anti-caste. But who did it? Catherine Impey, sitting in Somerset, England. So she was a white woman, and she was for universal brotherhood. That means she wanted the white folks and black folks to become anti-race, and she was part of that movement, universal sisterhood, brotherhood movement. And Ida B. Wells was another lady, African American, who was part of this movement. And W.B. Du Bois was also part of this movement, anti-race, white and black people should come together. W.B. Du Bois thought about it. And he was the first Harvard PhD African-American in 1895. One of my most favorite writers. I wanted to do a postdoctoral work in Princeton on his work. And I still think about it in the future on W.B. Du Bois. W.B. Du Bois knew a lot about India, and she knew about Dravidian Buddhism. That's why I dedicated my dissertation at Columbia. And this is, of course, Harlem Renaissance. Harlem Renaissance, look at these people. The picture was taken around probably 1910 or 1915. Look at the pose of these people, how happy they are after all the humiliation they went. Look at the way they have dressed up. Look at the way this guy stands up. And there were women, girl children, changing within a century. This was hub of Harlem. Imagine all of the way they have dressed up. Their own fathers, probably some of them were still humiliated as slaves. Their own fathers were slaves. Their own grandfathers were slaves. And yet they could become like this. And they are living in the houses like this. It's not an easy, brothers and sisters, to transform like this. People who are humiliated rose up. This is what and then Marcus Garvey. Let's go to the next one. Marcus Garvey. Look at the way he is dressed. So he was taking procession in Harlem, New York City, like this. This guy is Marcus Garvey, the way with a hat and sword and so on. He organized African Americans in Harlem and elsewhere. And let's go to the next one. This is Malcolm X. In New York, I had a picture in my house. I still have it here too. Very inspiring for me and powerful speaker. His speeches are available. Listen, flawless English. In America, he was considered as one of the best debaters ever. One time he was just considered next to President somebody. And he was considered the second best speaker. Probably he was the best. He had the guts to speak and attack race and racism in like nobody else. So Malcolm X. And let's move to the next one, please. This is Sojourner Truth. I wanted you to see the picture. This lady was the one who asked the question, am I not a woman? So in India, we have feminism. Who are the feminists? Do you think the women have the space in it? Christian women do have a space in it. Women who are reduced as lower caste and Dalit women, do they have the space in it? You need to answer that question, like Sojourner Truth. Let's go to the next slide. This is Harriet Tubman. She was the one who organized underground railroads, helped many African Americans to escape from slavery into Canada and elsewhere to become free humans. And by the way, the person I worked with for my thesis, Ayuthi, sitting in Chennai, he died in 1914. He writes about underground railroads. So people in Chennai knew about probably Harriet Tubman and underground railroads. So very interesting. Next slide, please. So Catherine Impey, this is a white woman who published the magazine called Anti-caste. Probably we need to start one, all of us, right? Let's go to the next one. This is W.B. Du Bois, very popular, first Harvard PhD, 1895. Everybody else was white in Harvard at that time. Look at this man being humiliated every day, still getting it done. Nobody can publish like the way this man did. By the way, when he died, he did not die as an American citizen. He went over to Ghana, took the citizenship and died there. Good. So the next one, race, gender, and caste. So we all know about this. I used to teach a course called Race, Gender, and Caste in India at JNU. So everybody would be very, say, excellent talks or excellent lectures for race. When I began to talk about gender, the boys, the young men in my class, they would go under the table. And when they began to talk about caste, everybody would go quiet, right? So this is because it's hitting us very close, right? So we were very ferocious about race, but did not care about gender and caste. So that's why I took up this course. So we have Varna, concept of Varna, which is literally color. So from ancient time, we have race and racism in India. Let's be clear. Manudharma Shastra, which I teach here, very clearly says how 11 body parts could be taken out from human's body. You know for what? To do intercaste sexual relationship, to get married in an intercaste way. So we have Manu emboweling, drawn. He supported drawn and then quartering people and so on from ancient times. So it is called religious text, Manudharma Shastra. Should it be? No other violent religious text in the world exists as equal to Manudharma Shastra. This I say as an anthropologist, as a historian, and as an academic, and above all, as a simple, normal human. So please check yourself. So we have concept of race in India for a long time, Varna, and it's still alive. So women and girls, have they been property? So Sanskritist Stephanie Jemison says, beyond a point, you can't get to know about status of Brahmin women in India. This is the status of Brahmin women, because all the religious texts in India are connected with Brahmin men, Brahmin male, what I call Brahmin male power. So like we saw white men writing about themselves and blacking out the white women's history, in India, we have Brahmin male men writing about themselves, and Rajput and Vaishyas, not much. And forget about the Adivasis, Dalits, and OBCs, and whoever we call that, we're lower caste. No history about them, right? But they are all there as majority. Anyway, keep that in mind. So lower castes have been property, we know that. Untouchables, who are we? Imagine we calling our own fellow Indians as untouchables. Amazing concept, right? Like we have slavery, we have minstrels, we have Jim Crow. Like Jim Crow, the concept of untouchability is a Jim Crow for me. That's how we humiliate our citizens who've been creating whatever foods they produce, whatever meat they make, whatever fish they catch, we all eat. But when they come to our areas close, they are untouchables for us. Do we know who's producing our wheat? Who is producing our rice? People we call as lower caste and Dalits, right? Majority of them do that. But we continue to humiliate them. What is untouchability? So have you philosophically thought about it? It is a fiction created by the privileged to humiliate people like Jim Crow. So while we are bashing up Jim Crow, let's not forget what is going on in India in the name of untouchability and so on. Good. So all that, and then I'm raising this question. We have many Indian religions. Is there a caste-free religion in India? Imtiaz Ahmed has written about caste among Muslims. Please read that. And you don't have to ask about casteism within Christianity. So most of our religions are having casteism within it. It's called Hinduization of other religions. So Hinduization of Islam, Hinduization of Christianity, all of them are there. And I'm raising this question, brothers and sisters, as a collective responsibility to make this probing question to us. How do we interrogate the caste divisions and gender divisions within the religions which we may believe in? Do we have space for atheists? I'm not sure. Somebody, our own fellow humans, comes and tells us, what do we do? Do we encourage them and keep them? We need to keep in mind. And move to the next slide, please. Hassan, sorry. Hassan?
Hello, Hassan.
Oops.
Maybe he got a phone call or something. His connectivity is lost.
Okay. So maybe I'll proceed with what I have. It's running. So if he comes back, it'll be nice. Okay. So he's not come back yet.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, good.
Yeah, he's back.
Okay. Let's go to the slide, brother, quickly. I'll wind up in a few minutes and to that slide. Yeah. Yeah, here. So that way, there is a question for all of us: is that how do we engage within our religion to raise these questions? And then, so likewise, I'm wondering, as an anthropologist and a historian, I'm asking: is there an Indian culture which is caste-free, a caste-free culture, where every human can feel, hey, this is a human. Everybody has the same body, same brain. A privileged person doesn't have an extra lobe of brain. Is everybody getting treated equally? I'm not sure. Maybe there are clues. Buddhism is one, and there are vernacular deities and cultures we should think about. And of course, Buddhism, moment I say, that what happened in Sri Lanka, what's happening in Myanmar. Buddhist monks indulging in violence. That's a tragedy. So that version also we should be alert to. So let's move to the next slide, please. This slide I want you to keep in mind. Look at the way. These were Gujaratis who were beaten and broken. Like we saw the video or the picture of lynching, one guy is beating. It's our own fellow humans. Women are watching, others are watching, somebody is taking a picture nicely. The same spectacle. It's a family event, community event, right? Beating of these men, our own brothers and sisters. So we were horrible about lynching, right? Family events. We were horrible about the white men, 10,000 of them who is going and seeing it as a family. What are we doing as Indians? So this picture is important for us to think through. This bodily humiliation, as I speak, somebody is getting killed in India, somebody is getting humiliated, hands tied up, somebody is breaking the bone, and others are watching. Next slide, please.
Abid, please show the slide. I think I have disconnect from laptop actually. Abid, please start the PPT from your laptop.
Okay. This is a slide again, a bodily humiliation of a family. This is available. I use it to students to show. Look at the way a man is humiliated, and a woman is humiliated, and the child. Everybody is stripped, and here is a child watching. We need to think about this. What are we trying to do? This a family getting humiliated in public. Everybody is dressed up. A sister is humiliated. A mother is humiliated, and so this is how. This is also happening in India, and we need to be cautious. This kind of bodily violence has to stop. Where does this come from? In the name of religion, in the name of caste, in the name of gender, is very much there. One should be aware of this, and it has got to stop. So the respect for human body is at its very low, and it's time for us to ask this question, whether we have humanism in our religions, in our cultural practices. If not, it's time for us to bring. Let's go to the next one, please. This is another picture from MP. A man, recently happened just a week or 10 days ago. A man took poison and died. Here is a child crying. This picture really haunted me. It could be, and there's poor people, and they had their land, collector, local fellows, everybody got together, deprived their land, and the father could not bear, took pesticide and died. And the child is crying. So this is just a week ago. So this kind of violence continue. Move to the next slide, please. So therefore, we have many intellectuals, even though likely we saw African Americans, many of them were resisting. Like in African American leaders, like W.B. Du Bois, Malcolm X, India too had its own share of organic intellectuals. Organic intellectual comes from the academic, from the theoretician Gramsci. So I take it from him. So caste-free organic intellectuals have been around, and some of them are this. Many of you know. Jyotiba Phule, he wrote a book on slavery. It's called Gulamgiri, and he dedicated it to African Americans. Way back in 1885, he published, and he dedicated it to African Americans. Look at the mutual thing. I told you about Ayyathurai writing about the Underground Railroads. Phule is dedicating his book, Slavery, talking about the Indian caste system, but dedicating it to African Americans. There are some books also connected to Phule's understanding of race. Savitribai Phule is a powerful, his wife, and she was a great teacher too. She was the first pioneering teacher in India, passing on education to lower castes and people who were humiliated as untouchables. And when she was walking out, she would carry 2 saris, it seems, because privileged caste men would throw dung and shit on her, and she would suffer all that, go to a place, clean up, wear another sari, and would start teaching the children from the marginalized communities. So Phule, in fact, I think our Teachers' Day should become January 3rd, not September 5th. September 5th is Radhakrishnan's. I have a serious problem with he was a plagiarist. I'm going to talk about him and wind up. So Ayyathurai was another leader about whom I worked, Buddhism. He was an anti-caste. He was a pioneer of Buddhism in modern India, Ayyathurai. And then Swapneswari Ambal was also, she called herself as a universal sister. This was from Chennai. And she published a journal in the early 20th century. So her name is Swapneswari Ambal. I am universal sister. And of course, Periyar, Ambedkar, So all and more to be unearthed. There are many organic intellectuals. We don't know who are the organic intellectuals in Bihar, in Orissa, in Rajasthan. Let's not say they don't have any organic intellectuals. They've been fighting against religious violence. They've been fighting against caste violence. But unfortunately, our academia, it doesn't have enough tools to unearth their histories, their anthropology, and so on, ethnography, and so on. It's time for us to do it. So I'm the last stretch. Let's move to the next slide, please. This is Phule, Next one, please. This is Savitribai Phule, the first woman teacher for the marginalized, and we should definitely demand her birthday to be the Teachers' Day. Let's move to the next one. This is Ayyathurai, who lived in Chennai, and he died. He was born in 1845, died in 1914. The pioneer of Tamil Buddhism. He rejected caste, attacked caste, and took on Brahmanism, confronted Brahmins, wrote. He was the first guy to publish a journal For 7 years, he published a journal, non-stop, from 1907 to 1914. This is Ayyathurai Das. Please read about him. There are some articles now. Let's go to the next one. So this is Periyar, another great man. He was a radical atheist. And without him, there wouldn't have been a Dravidian movement in Tamil Nadu. And he was a powerful feminist. He even said, like, why should women, should ever get married? That they should live the way they want. And should childbirth be an obligation? He asked these questions. Periyar. Next one, please. So this is Ambedkar and Savita Ambedkar. Savita Ambedkar, I met her a couple of decades ago in Delhi. And she was a woman who married to Ambedkar. And by the way, this was an intercaste marriage, anti-caste marriage. You shouldn't say intercaste, beg your pardon, not intercaste, anti-caste marriage. Savita ex-Brahminized herself. There is Brahminization, ex-Brahminization. She gave up her Brahminhood, became a casteless person, married Ambedkar. And I was glad to meet her and learn about her. Let's go to the next one. So this Ambedkar and Periyar coming together against caste in India. They had a good meeting, and a lot of thinkers, they celebrate Ambedkar and insult Periyar, which is right now happening in Tamil Nadu, which is wrong. So they had come together on an anti-caste platform. What is important is, they were all for ex-Brahminization. They were not for killing Brahmins or stupidly thought so. No, they wanted to civilize the privileged caste fellows. Give up your Brahminhood, like we would tell the white man, give up your white manhood, become just human. Likewise, we have to tell the privileged caste groups, give up your caste identities, become just humans. Can we be Indian citizens? Can we all be equal? Can we share our food? I have the same sexual organ like you have, same brain I have. All of us, can we come together? So that's a question. So this is why I'm asking humanism is needed. Let's go to the next one, please. So this time for undoing race, gender, caste. So historically, Aryan migration is confirmed. Aryanism is confirmed. There is a debate about it and so on. No more debate. Aryan invasion was clearly there. There are enough books. So there is a book that I wanted to show how the Brahmins won. This in most of my talks I say how Brahmins won. This is from a famous Sanskritist called Johannes Bronkhorst. So he has written this book, How the Brahmins Won from Alexander to the Guptas. So it's the ancient time. So this is all there. So how do we confront? It's very much that Hitler came about only because of Aryanism and the rejection of caste. We have what is called casteism thriving. So it's high time. There is a famous Bengali intellectual called Deepesh Chakravarti, who is teaching in Chicago University, or maybe he has moved to Princeton. Probably I don't want to remember. So he wrote a book called Provincializing Europe. He wanted to, that's a great book. Colonialism did all possible damage around the world. We are ruined forever in a big way because of European colonialism. But please remember, there never ever Deepesh Chakravarti attacked caste system. So colonialism, casteism came together to ruin India in a big way. How many of our Bengali intellectuals have attacked casteism? I'm talking about Deepesh Chakravarti, Gayatri Spivak, all of them. So I'm living in the West for the past 20 years. Literally, I only see many of the Mukherjees, Banerjees, Chatterjees, and Chakrabortis, okay, or other privileged men. I have never come across OBCs. Forget about Adivasis, Dalits, and so on, please. So Western Academy, as the Indian Academy, is controlled by the privileged groups. And this means there is ex-Brahminization has to be theorized, things have to change so that others can participate. I'm one of the guys who is campaigning for that, to democratize Western institutions. Like it has to be done in India too. Long way to go. And so we need to reject Brahminism. That means, we need to support ex-Brahminization of bringing in Brahmin brothers and sisters, not as Brahmins, but ex-Brahminizing them, talking about inclusivity and humanism and so on. That's what I mean here. So I'm really not sure. Can somebody call himself a Hindu or Hinduism and be caste-free? I'm not sure. Think about it. What will happen if you pull the pillar called caste? Will Hinduism be there? I don't know. We'll think about that. Then, of course, Indian philosophy. We talk about Indian philosophy in a big way. The question is there humanism in Indian philosophy? I'm not sure. If there is evidence, please do share with me. That means treating every dark human, woman, Adivasi, Dalit, everybody equally. Do we have that in Indian philosophy? Or it is a Brahmin male power sugar-coated as Indian philosophy? I'm not sure. Please clarify, write, speak with evidences. Don't talk about, some metaphysical concept and we should not fool around. So please keep that in mind. And here, of course, the towering Indian philosopher is called Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan. He taught at in Calcutta, Calcutta University. But you know what happened? He published the most famous book called Indian Philosophy. And sadly, this book had stolen ideas. He stole ideas from his own student called Jadunath Sinha. So he stole his own student's idea and packed it as Indian philosophy and published. Jadunath Sinha, as I am saying here, filed a case. And eventually it was found out Radhakrishnan had plagiarized Jadunath Sinha's dissertation and published as a book. And this was going to finish off Radhakrishnan in a big way. So, Sir Ashutosh Mukherjee, right? He was a vice chancellor, and his son, Shyam Prasad Mukherjee, I put Mukherjee and so on and that because I don't appreciate caste-bearing names. I don't feel like shaking hands with somebody who bears caste name anymore. So we need to advocate a movement to give up caste names from anybody. That the caste style they don't need. So that's why I've darkened Mukherjee as in dark colors. So Shyam Prasad Mukherjee helped somehow to settle the case outside the court, and Jadunath Sinha sadly agreed. Radhakrishnan's skin was saved. Otherwise, he would have gone to jail. So Shyam Prasad Mukherjee, who was he? He was the founder of Bharatiya Janata Sangh in 1951. This party was a predecessor of BJP. And this guy, Shyam Prasad Mukherjee, was a member of Nehru's cabinet. And he resigned from Nehru's cabinet because Nehru was trying to do something for the Muslims. So he was a hater of Muslims, he was a casteist, and that guy went on to produce an institution called Bharatiya Janata Sangh. No wonder BJP has nicely tagged on to that. So this history we should know. Now Radhakrishnan's birthday is our Teacher's Day. So my request to you is that please don't celebrate Teacher's Day as long as this plagiarist birthday is your Teacher's Day. It has to change. And I recommend Savitribai Phule's birth date, January 3rd, as Teacher's Day. Hopefully we succeed within our own lifetime. Now, next slide, please. So that's what. So this is what I meant towards race-free, caste-free, women-centered India we need. Everything we need to look at women-centered and girl-centered. We don't care. So that perspective, the moment we develop, we'll become a lot more human, I think. The women in India, I'm not trying to be, I know I'm a heterosexual male, but I clearly understand through women's oppression, we can understand our humanity at large. How have they survived? So I think every course, be it history, anthropology, philosophy, should have a compulsory course on feminism and women's theory. So looking at Islam from a woman's point of view, is that possible? Looking at Christianity from a Christian woman's point of view, is it possible? So how do we do it? It's a big deal. It's high time we do it. The moment we understand everything through our daughters, through our mothers, through our sisters, through our wives, things would be, I think we the men would become a lot more human than we are. So that way, the last point for me is that so that we develop a we feeling. As of now, we may not have, oh, that guy eats beef, this guy eats pork, that guy eats fish, this guy is a vegetarian. That's the nonsense that is going on. They're insulting. Oh, that is a woman, I am a man, that kind of thing. So the we feeling philosophically could help us to come together and become better humans. So move to the next slide, please. And that is all I have. I'm sorry about the delay and perhaps the technical problems. So this way, I wanted to connect in some ways, connect with race as a metaphor to understand the problems in India. So my goal was that I think I tried my level best to communicate that to you. So thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Professor Ayyathurai, for a fascinating sweep of racism in America and then bringing it back to India. I'm just going to sum up in a couple of minutes. I'm not going to speak much because it's as fascinating and as clear as one lecture could get. So you delivered the lecture more, I would say, more as a teacher than a kind of distant, lofty intellectual. So I appreciate that, the way you spoke to us. So Professor Ayyatthurai's lecture covered, ground all the way from the beginning of, if we can call that colonialism, of course. I mean, when Christopher Columbus came, we do not usually, do not understand that as the way we understand today colonialism in terms of its mechanism, politics, occupation, administrative control. So that's a little different. But how it paved the way for Western powers to come to the Asian, Latin American, African countries, in the Caribbean for that matter, and how people were taken as slaves. So you started with that, and then I like this what you said. Even as slavery was going on, and the West was writing about rights of men, which they call rights of men, was not actually rights of men. It was the rights of white men. We need to understand that history. Even today, probably what we call the rights of man, all these liberal ideas of freedom, liberty, fraternity, justice that we have, even if we apply that to the Indian context, it's not so much about all Indians. It's about a particular class of people, of course. In Indian context, it will be upper caste. In the Western context, it will be the white people. I think that's why we're all fighting, resisting, struggling, so that these rights could become universal rights. But then, as you pointed out, every struggle, every oppression and humiliation also leads to some form of resistance. And you gave the example of Nat Turner. And I was also thinking of the film 12 Years a Slave.
Exactly.
Solomon Northup's life, his own memoir has been made into a film. And we see a lynching and hanging there in that particular film as well.
Correct.
And more importantly, how a musician was actually captured and brought into slavery. He was a musician, but the white people couldn't believe a black man could be a musician. So anyways, and finally you say how you got back to the more recent history, like in the Harlem movement, and how it sort of gave birth to a host of artists, intellectuals. And I have also been very fortunate to be in Harlem sometimes. So I could immediately connect, with what you're saying. And the whole idea of appropriation, of how one could appropriate and then sort of resist that notion. And you brought it back to the Indian context, this whole idea of race, how we could possibly connect to the Indian context. And as you said, it all could start with the idea of the Aryan race itself. The idea of Aryanism as distinct as a separate race, because the very notion of caste is born with the idea of Aryanism. Someone who is racially superior than others. I mean, the Western notion of race, as you pointed out, was built on certain notions of superiority. Right? The whole idea of racial superiority, which was abated and helped by Christianity and science to an extent. I'm not sure if in India we needed science, but certainly we needed Hinduism to justify it. In India, we better stay away from science. I mean, we most often stay away. So we are not going to mobilize science to justify caste. Hinduism or religion itself would be enough, or other religions for that matter. And I like your point about, how do we resist then if we have a situation of this kind where some people are sort of always oppressed, suppressed, or made invisible, the way we say today, whom we refuse to see. In fact, I'm reading right now, again, rereading Salman Rushdie, his novel Midnight Children. He says in one place, when his mother Amina Sinai goes to Old Delhi, in a poor locality in Old Delhi where all the snake charmers and others live. And Rushdie uses exactly this word, that the city-trained people of Amina Sinai couldn't even see these people. Our eyes are not even trained to see these invisible people somehow. You need another form, another way of looking, and that's what you are getting at. So how do we then resist if this is the case? And that's where the role of the organic intellectual comes in. And I do agree, and we have been talking about it. And I think BASE is a good platform for that. We need to produce intellectuals who come from within the community and who can voice the concerns. That's why BASE is such an important platform, which has brought together, and I'm sure is going to produce many more. Now, I'm not going to talk more. I think those graphics were very appealing, the ones you showed. Yeah, in the Indian context especially. I mean, we know what's happening for at least 8, 9, 10 years in India. I mean, it has been happening all along, but it has intensified the way Dalits and certain minorities have been attacked.
Yes.
They're being constantly attacked, lynched, killed, named in the name of Hinduism. In the
Very
name
true.
of superiority, is something that I think your lecture did a great job of connecting these two ideas of race and caste, and in certain ways showing that they are not different. So that's why I come back to my initial point where I said that Indian state had protested when at the World Conference Against Racism in 2001 in Durban, National Campaign on Dalit Human Rights had actually said we must think of caste as race.
Correct.
But the Indian government had protested. But your lecture once more has shown us why it's so important that we universalize and we understand that caste is no way different from race. The way ideas of hierarchy, ideas of othering, ideas of humiliation is perpetuated on certain bare bodies without any rights almost. Constitutionally you have rights, but of course it is Constitution, as Ambedkar himself said, Constitution cannot guarantee everything. We need social equality, and that's exactly what is lacking. So thank you very much once more for your wonderful lecture. Fascinating, actually.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor.
Yeah. I would open the floor now for questions. I would prefer if, those who have questions, if they directly ask the question, you can switch on your microphone and you can ask the question directly.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, please, Mr.
Yeah.
Shankar.
This is Shankar here. I'm calling from Bangalore.
Oh, thank you.
How are you now?
You're doing well, Pa. Thank you. Go ahead.
It's so nice to see you, and
Thank you.
to the fascinating lecture. My question is about the cultural appropriation. While the cultural appropriation is being resisted pretty aggressively in America, and we have seen various instances of the resistance and popular struggle, both on and off the media, it becomes it's not an issue which is so hot in an Indian context. Let's say even within Hinduism, there is various. I won't call it as Hinduism as I speak. It's more of a Brahmanism, where the cultural appropriation takes place pretty aggressively, but very subtly over a period of time. Yet we have not had a proper articulated response in resisting this cultural appropriation. What do you think is essentially fundamentally wrong with our response or structuring our response?
Yeah, there are 2-3 things that we should that I gather from your question. Number one, the concept of culture itself, anthropologically speaking, historically speaking, has not been taken seriously yet. So there, I know academics in the West who have done serious work with Dalits across India, but a lot of condescending tendencies are there. That means, they are their body is getting mutilated, they are humiliated, they are given low wage, they are insulted. All these, yes, we know. But the questions like W.B. Du Bois would ask, like Malcolm X would ask, a whole lot of African American thinkers have been asking, I am also a man, I am also creative. So can you talk about my positive culture? Among the whole lot of people, W.B. Du Bois does that. That's why he calls it as Black Reconstruction. to talk about the positive history of African Americans. So that kind of effort hasn't happened regarding the poor and marginalized communities in India, including people we call, the very word Dalit, it means broken, right? Suppose if one is, anybody in this group, if one is a Dalit, why should he or she be called as a Dalit forever? Now, I should understand she would be creating something that is extremely useful for all of us, right? It is others' idea by which she was broken. Now, she is not creating all the 24 hours, she is creating, inventing, sharing. So do I have the tools to understand? So the concept of culture itself is not taken seriously, culture of the oppressed. That, the emancipating, global, universal cultural elements of the oppressed, we have not taken seriously. So the moment we do that, then you would understand, say a Mahar in Maharashtra or a Chamar in UP, you would not call him as a Chamar or a Mahar, right? You would try to call him through his or her own vernacular. So these are the caste categories imposed by the dominant groups. So the question is, if the Chamar is not a Chamar, who is she? Are we ready? We don't have a tools to understand that. So understanding the positive culture of the oppressed is the first step. And then comes what you suggested as appropriation. How has it done? Who has taken? So it's very clear. Privileged groups are sitting and eating only because of the labor and produce and products of the oppressed. So what have they created? My question is, somebody was here, Uma Chakravarti was here to talk about Bharatanatyam and Carnatic music. I asked her a question when she had come to Germany. Is there a possibility of Hindustani, Carnatic, Bharatanatyam and other dance form to be inclusive of majority of the people? She bluntly said no. It is meant for the Brahmins, it's meant for the privileged. Others would be, in a very condescending way, accommodated, co-opted, but they can never become the center. So if a black, dark-skinned woman performs Bharatanatyam, you would not like it. You see? So that way, a Muslim performs Bharatanatyam, you would not take it. It's not authentic.
Can I interrupt here?
Go ahead.
Sorry. This is exactly my problem. When we talk about Bharatanatyam, we forget that Bharatanatyam itself it's an appropriated art form from indigenous art form. And
Very true.
Now they've kind of labeled it and structured it and presented it to the world as if it's their own art form.
Yes.
So the actual question is, should we reclaim Bharatanatyam or do we reclaim the indigenous form which led to the birth of Bharatanatyam? Here's the question.
Very good question. So this, I would go back to say, anything that is inclusive and exchangeable has to be unpacked first, unraveled first. So I would say, more than bothering much about Bharatanatyam, other stuff, what are the cultural, musical, medicinal, knowledge, I call it knowledge traditions of the oppressed, the positive knowledge traditions, in terms of agriculture, in terms of medicine, in terms of many other art forms. We need to dig them up first. We have to do that. So that is already they're present, historically it's been there, right now it is there. We have to do that. And then of course this appropriation, how Devadasis practices have become Brahmin women's Bharatanatyam, all that is later. But as an anthropologist, I would argue that it's time for us to dig up indigenous, native Indian communities' own art forms that we have not recorded, but that we have not unraveled yet. And then we will see what has been happening. So I think that's a way to go about. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, before I take, there are quite a few questions, looks like. Professor Ayyathurai, I was wondering, because any art form is not independent at this very moment, independent of the market forces. Right. So when you talk about, reviving these indigenous art forms, I was also thinking that it so happens that we always have this notion of high culture and then something called low culture or folk culture.
Yes.
Now, depending on the market forces, how do we then really salvage these local forms of,
Yeah, that's a challenging. I do understand how it is commercialized, how it is appropriated, that is going on. I agree. But on the other hand, this is the ulterior mode. Right now, through the Brahminical categories or condescending categories, we are trying to look at many communities. Mm-hmm. So, but the moment we are trying to say, no, these communities are not part of the established caste hierarchy. So they have their own independent history.
Right.
What are they? So the moment we start digging up, I don't think immediately it will not, we should not bother about the corporatization or commercialization or marketization of those aspects. But as of now, we will be digging up and holding on to something to prove that these communities have had their own independent histories that are not subcontinental but vernacular. They have had their own languages. For example, what is the contribution of a marginalized Bengali community to the very language of Bengali? Right. We don't know. We look at it from the privileged group's point of view, the Bengali, right? But what is the influence of other communities that have been using this language? Likewise, Tamil. So we have always had big creators within this language, traditions, within the vernacular traditions. So I think we should slowly work on that using their own archives, oral tradition, and so on. And then probably we should control the marketing elements too. But this is data. First of all, the positive culture for me is important for us to dig up.
Yeah, that's right. I agree with you. And because you said about Bengal, if you look at something like Baul form, which is a folk form, but most of this is being sung now by the upper caste musicians in studios.
Yeah, right. Likewise, the Tamil language. By the way, majority of the Muslims in Tamil Nadu don't know Urdu or Arabic. For example, Abdul Kalam didn't know Arabic or Urdu. He know that. He only spoke Tamil and English. Our president. So, but the Muslims have been contributing to Tamil language for a long time. We have no enough records and analysis. Why? Likewise, Christians. So these elements, I play Muslim singers whenever I teach courses here in Germany, Tamil Muslim singers, to talk about their pronunciation. Nahur Hanifa is one of them. So that way, so this is a rich history. We need to do that. Likewise, other languages and vernacular cultures.
Right. Thank you very much. So there's a question by Sheikh Abid Hassan. Abid, can you ask your question directly?
Hello.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I have two questions to you. My first question is, racism against Bengali Muslims resulting in NRC, Nelly, and Dimapur lynching by Nagas. Do you see these things as Brahmanism?
Oh, brother, I'm not fully sure. I have not followed it up. But so therefore I cannot comment closely on that. But what I can say is this: I've traveled in Northeast right up to Mizoram, Meghalaya, Nagaland, and Bangladesh border, and so on, Tripura border. So I do understand the so-called ethnic tensions and so on. This is I think the colonial vestiges are there. But I think more importantly, while we are recognizing these communities as indigenous communities, I think the inclusive elements have to be also sort of promoted. I don't know how, but some of the elders and young people should come together to constantly think about no bodily violence. Is there a way to share what we have? It's not easy. It is challenging. So instead of mutilating somebody's body, physically excluding and killing that is being done in Myanmar, for instance, is there any other way? Don't we have enough land? Don't we have enough other resources to take care of people who are dying in front of us? I'm not sure. So maybe we should take a serious effort to be inclusive and then not mutilate each other. So that way, I may have a problem with a Naga or a Muslim treating each other as high and low. That's my view, brother. Thank you.
Okay. Another question is, there's a lot of debate around Periyar nowadays. A lot of scheduled caste people do not see Tamil nationalism as anti-caste movement. How do you see their response to this?
This is a fantastic question. We have to think about it. I will use my own research to answer a little bit. Ayodhya Das was the first guy. Ayodhya Das was as I said, the founder of modern Buddhism. My doctoral work at Columbia University is about him. And the interesting part is, he clearly understood the problem of casteism and how Brahminism and the Brahmins were the motor force behind casteism. So when he was from a marginalized community, So one of his own relatives did not like what Ayodhya Das was doing, calling himself as a Tamil. not as this caste or that caste. So this relative of Ayyathurai insulted Ayyathurai by writing in a magazine that this guy belongs to this lower caste. Immediately Ayyathurai filed a case in the colonial court and said, I would like to be called only as a Tamil. I don't want to be identified by any caste. So the court verdict, colonial court verdict in Madras High Court went in favor of Ayyathurai. The verdict was, yes, Ayyathurai should never be called as a caste if he doesn't like. If this or that caste, if he doesn't like. Instead, he should be called only as a Tamil. Now, the point is this. If each and every one of us, if there are people who believe in caste, how do you believe in? What is your caste identity? If you say you are a Brahmin, I would ask how. Don't tell me Purush did it and therefore you are. No. How do you benefit out of this? How do you identify yourself a Rajput? Beyond a point, if I keep asking questions, you will lose your clues about your caste identity. So if you shed your caste identity, what is your identity? My guess would be through the language you speak. You would be a Bengali, you would be a Tamil, you would be a Telugu, you would be a Rajasthani, you would be a Bundelkhandi. All of them are welcomeable. Because if I'm a Bengali, I speak the language, same language like you do. What is the point in we talk about caste? So vernacular linguistic identity, I find, is a way against caste system. That is increasingly, I'm beginning to, intellectually beginning to get convinced about it. In contrast, Sanskrit is the subcontinental Brahminical linguistic connection that is there. So, but other non-Brahminical identities are rooted in the vernacular. That's one. So the moment when people start talking about their own linguistic identity, we say, oh, that guy has become a Bengali nationalist. If this guy become a Bundelkhandi nationalist, this guy was a Tamil nationalist. That's stupidity, in my opinion. So I do understand Dravidian movement has been hijacked in a very OBC way or a backward caste way. I do understand the politics. But there have been organic intellectuals of the oppressed who just wanted to hold on to their linguistic identity and nothing else. So you call it and attack it as a Tamil nationalism, I think that is wrong. You are trying to again put them as Dalits, put them as scheduled castes, put them as some Parayar or Pallar or Mahar or Chamar identity. No. Is there a way out? It could be linguistic, and calling it as secessionist, nationalist, all that, I think is deeply problematic. We are trying to push those people back into their slavery, back into their caste identity. That's how I look at it. Thank you.
Okay, we can take Hassan's question. Hassan has a question.
Yes. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes, you are. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yes, my question is that, sir, Kancha Ilaya said that Dalit Bahujan's patriarchy is much more democratic. So what is your view on it? And how can you address the gender discrimination of Dalits, Dalits women and others within their families and communities? I'm not saying outside of the community, within the community, because gender caste issues addressed, but gender discrimination within the community is not addressed properly. Thank you.
Correct. Yeah, no problem. So the first question regarding Kancha Ilaya, you'll be surprised to know. While I was teaching at JNU, literally, Kancha Ilaya finished his Why I'm Not a Hindu book, literally staying with me in JNU. Whenever he came to Delhi, he would stay with me in my residence, and so we are friends. And I was one of the guys to review that book when it was out. He uses the category Dalitization in that book. It's a very powerful one. So in contrast to Brahminization, Kancha Ilaya talks about Dalitization. That means he talks about how Dalitization refers to Dalit people's labor, their inclusivity, their sharing, their productivity, all that has been beneficial to Indians across. So, and there is also some sort of a gender parity, and he talks about, because men and women work in the lands and and produce things together, and the hierarchy is a lot less. So therefore, he thinks Dalitization is probably required for the country than Brahminization. That's the argument of the book. That's one side. And of course, he has also come up with a category called Dalit Bahujans, which is really powerful. Kanshi Ram, for example, in a way, his idea of majority people, Bahujan, in a way, influences, I think, Kancha Ilaiah to combine with Dalit Bahujan. Even if you talk about Bahujan, look at, the Yadavs are attacking Dalits in Bihar and UP. We know that. It's not the Brahmins who are doing it. So intellectually, Brahmins are ruining the happiness of the lower caste and Dalits. And here you go, OBCs physically finishing. Is the case in Tamil Nadu too. OBC, who call themselves as, I am a Tevar, I am a Veneer, go butcher people who are so-called, who are identified as Dalits. So this is very much there. So even this is the case. So how do we grapple these relationship between OBCs and Dalits is a big challenge. I think there has to be a categorical changes. Kancha looks at it subcontinentally, which is problematic. Maybe it has to be looked at regionally. How the Dalits and OBCs have come together over a period of time, unlike other privileged groups, all these points we need to really dig up through archives, through vernacular literature and folk traditions and so on. So it's a long way to understand Dalit Bahujan integrity, but I think this is a lot better than a relationship between a Brahmin and a OBC or a Brahmin and a Dalit. So the possibilities of integration is more between the Dalits and OBCs. That's one. I do agree with the gender problem within Dalit communities, definitely. And especially, say, imagine a class, your own class, you are students, some of you are students, some of you are teachers. In a class, who's a role model for a first generation Dalit? This I've studied, therefore I'm saying. So in an engineering class, for example, in Chennai, say Anna University, where my brother-in-law and sister-in-law, they are teaching as professors. So in a class, who are the role models for a Dalit or an Adivasi who comes in? It is always the privileged groups who dominate. It is their culture. A Muslim who is willing to eat beef or meat cannot happily say, I am a Tamil Muslim. An Adivasi can never say, I love my fish. You have to go under the table because the class is dominated by the Brahminical values. So this is the scenario. In that structure, the Brahmin male power is the example for the many other groups. That is the tragedy. This is getting reflected among the educated subalterns also, mimicking the privileged. So it has to be controlled. And so they have to take seriously understanding their own mothers and sisters. What are the histories of their own women? Is it Brahminical or non-Brahminical? If it is non-Brahminical, is it anti-caste? So is it gender sensitive? How is my father anyway more than my mother, who is contributing more? And this gender issue is there across the world, here in Germany. So among the scientists, only 1/3 are women scientists. Many German women are not getting equally paid for the same job. The German women go back home and do more job than men. So Germany is one of the top countries in the world, 4 or 5 countries, which is, like that. Of course, without colonialism, it couldn't be like that. But I'm saying women's position is really problematic in every community. The Dalit community is not exception. But I think women have a lot more, in comparison to a Brahmin woman, or probably even a Muslim woman, probably a Dalit woman has a lot more autonomy to challenge her subordination. So that's my point, and therefore, this has to be encouraged. That's why I said in my slide, look at every community from the girls' point of view, women's point of view. It has got to be done. Then I think the gender discrimination might get a lot more control. Which is not, we should not romanticize the Dalit community as the best example for the womanhood. No, not as yet, long way to go. But in comparison to Brahmin women's problems, Dalit women's problems are, in comparison, a lot better. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we have, we don't have much time now. We are close to 10 in India, 10 p.m. almost. So what we'll do now, we'll take, I think there are 2-3 questions I can see. I mean, Rupali, Sabir Hussain, and who else? At least a couple of them I can see. So maybe you can quickly ask your question, and maybe these two will be the last questions.
Yes.
Hello,
Hello.
sir. Okay.
Hi.
Oh,
Rupali, please go ahead.
Okay,
Rupali.
okay.
Yeah, Rupali.
Hello, Sir Jai Bhim. I hope you're
Hello,
doing well.
Rupali.
So my question to you is on the subject of anthropology itself. Now we have a lot of studies about Dalits or about oppressed communities from the perspective of the oppressed, from the perspective of the oppressor. And
Oppressor, yeah.
yes, so my question was about this division that we have had a lot of discussion about, this insider outsider binary discussion, native non-native discussion. So I want to understand the importance of native anthropology in current times, because that is what I think is crucial. But then there is a lot of non-native anthropologists commenting about native the wrongs of native anthropology. So what is your thought about it?
Right. A quick answer for that. Kansab, do I take other questions and combine, and how do I do?
Maybe we can take Sabir Hussein's question as well. Sabir?
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, can you ask your question?
Yes, I have a question that although Islam does not recognize any caste, Muslim community in South Asia apply a system of social discrimination. It developed as a result of ethnic segregation between the foreign conquerors, that is Ashraf, and the local converters, that is Azlaf. What are the reason and the effect in the Indian social activity?
Good. Thank you.
Okay, so I saw there's one more question. I mean, these questions were asked before, of course. Sadiqul Islam, are you here? No. So,
Sir, hello.
oh, Murshid Alam. Yes.
Yes, sir. Can I ask a question that whereas the gender discrimination is the concern?
Go ahead.
Hello. There are some customs in India, particularly in India, particularly. If you see the richer who need more job, that they have in a household, they have 4 members and 3 members out of them are in a job. Okay, and one is the women, and she is prohibited to work outside. But in case of a family who belong to agriculture, okay, if of the male member of his family thinks that my wife will not work out because it is hardy, or it is actually it's not for her.
Okay.
So what will be the actual perspective of the gender inequality?
Okay.
What will be the actual?
Okay.
So,
Good. Any more questions?
Any more, or maybe this is the last question? We'll stop with this question. Professor Ayyathurai, please go ahead with your.
Okay. So Rupali's question, native anthropology. So this is highly, we know that, anthropological traditions have been white man's perspective. They do field work, and it's all along has been white man's perspective. You always look at non-white communities in a very condescending way. You learn their language, yet you put them below. You study and come back and write about them in a very exotic way. So therefore, anthropological theories have developed a very severe, and rightly so, a serious critique of anthropology about natives. The white man's anthropology is basically him talking about the other. So othering other humans, right? So that is a very problematic history of anthropology itself. Having said that, how do we understand? Suppose all of us have to dig up our own ethnographies. How each of our community is should be understood. So if you try to do that, then we are not going to be like the white man's anthropological theory and tools that we would be using. So we will have to struggle and then probably go ethnographically devise tools in a way that would understand each people in their own locality through their own vernacular. So one clue that I have right now is that understanding or digging up new ethnographies in India could be done through, as I said, through their own language. And what are some of the trajectories to understand the local people whose histories and ethnographies have not been recorded? So you go, for example, I do field work with a community which is producing some crop or some product. I be with them. What are the ways they make it? How do they pass it on to other next generation? Is it through oral tradition? Is it through the written tradition? Is it through experience? And I write about that. And they would say, this is when I'm getting into memory studies now. I want to understand the memory of people. So there is this cultural memory, there is this contiguous memory. So how different generations I can trace back to my great grandfather, not beyond. So that's one set of memory. So this could be a possibility to unravel communities which are passing on their knowledge traditions. So thereby, an oppressed community could be given a positive ethnographic point of view, I guess, which is not like typical white anthropologist view. So that's one set of ideas that I would share with you, Rupali. But I see the necessity of understanding organic, communities through their own organic intellectuals, through their own knowledge traditions, through their own native perspective, which has not been recorded by others, whether in India or from outside. So how should it go? Without romanticizing, without ethnically becoming exclusive, without doing ethnic cleansing, all that. I am the best community in India, everybody is secondary. You should not slip into that. I'm not talking about that kind of native anthropology. Rather, I'm talking about how marginalized communities can identify themselves as this at par with others in a humanistic way. That is the question I think I'm interested in. The native anthropologists done by their own organic intellectuals. That's one answer, Rupali. We can talk more later if you want. Muslims and caste. This is it's a big problem. I've read about it. Imtiaz Ahmad talks about it. His books are there from the 70s. Please do read. Other academics in Jamia Islamiyah also talk about it. Caste among Muslims, between Ashrafs and Ajlafs, deep problems. And in Tamil Nadu also we face, there is a group called Lebbais who are humiliated as lower caste converts and so on. So this is a big issue that I think in their own regional ways, Muslim men and women should come together in a progressive way, ask this question. Yes, we have seen the tragedy, people are getting killed, we are getting killed. Is there any way that we can come together by shedding this caste division? By the way, my nephew just got married to a Muslim doctor in Tamil Nadu. We are proud about that. So we have that kind of a tradition. Encourage, let people come together. So it's very important. We need to encourage at the regional level, right? So then we shed caste. We allow people to come together. Interracial marriages were not allowed. I told you about genetical mutilation in US. Likewise, we are also do what is honor killing? No, it's caste murder, religious murder. So we need to shed all that between the Muslims themselves. We should come together, protect our identity. We want to be exclusive. We would be integrative. People may fall in love with others. Every damn Indian movie is about love. But when actually boys and girls, men and women fall in love, we go kill them. Stupidity, right? So that time I think we should have that kind of introspection. Allow our women to decide their men. Allow our men to decide their women. I think it's high time we do that. They don't want to kill themselves. They want to live like you and me. Who am I to judge? So when we do that, then I think the caste barriers between Ajlafs and Ashrafs would break down. They would be simply a humanistic Muslim, which they have to be. There has to be humanistic Christian, which they have to be. Right? So I think there is a possibility. I can be a Muslim, I can become a Christian later on through my own thinking. So all these possibilities are there. That's one set. Gender and equality. I don't know whether you got your question right, but in a nutshell, you talked about a family, but the point is this. You and me as men, do we do all the jobs at home at par with our women? Cleaning, washing.
Sorry, Professor, you are muted.
Okay, is it clear? Is it good?
Yeah.
Family level, each one of us, we the men, do we clean? Do we wash our women's clothes? I'm asking bluntly. Do we clean our toilets? How do we treat? So do we respect women's desire? Is there consensual sex? Do we ask, do you like this kind of sex or no? I want to speak very boldly. Sexuality, we don't speak. So when my wife says she doesn't like, I need to bloody stop. She doesn't have to do what I want her to do. When she asks me to do, I will do. If I don't like, I don't have to do. So that's the bodily appreciation of each other, right? We have not talked about it in every religion. So it's time we take up, we the educated people, as well as uneducated, should come together and deal. And that's about gender equality, gender and equality. We have a long way to go. The moment I keep my girl at home or woman at home at the center, then my behavior would change. That's my submission. Thank you.
Okay, sir. Thanks for your kind suggestion.
Absolutely.
Okay, sir.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Ayyathurai. I think that's a great note to end on. And we all know about African American women and who are doubly marginalized, but at the same time, they are the most resilient one as far as we study, we see, right? Even today, in today's America, men are listless. I mean, most African American men, through centuries of slavery, those who have seen it, we have seen how listless they are. It's the women who are actually working, women who putting food to the table. That's an amazing, way to end it, basically, this one. So thank you very much once again for such a wonderful lecture, and we really greatly enjoyed it. And for taking so many questions. Hopefully this conversation is going to continue in future. I hand over now to Mr. Mote.
Yeah, thank you so much. Now our Dr. Nargis madam, she teaches in Alia University in Calcutta as our base executive member. She will propose vote of thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, Abdul sir. As Gajendran sir, I call you because we call you Mati sir, but today I will call you Abdul sir. So I would like to thank BASE for giving me the opportunity to deliver vote of thanks. Good evening to all of you present here. On behalf of Bodily Academia for Social Empowerment, I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks and gratitude to our today's speaker, Dr. Gajendran Ayyathurai from Center for Modern Indian Studies, University of Göttingen, Germany. We are privileged, sir, to have you here with us. And I must mention that with a big, bright smile, you were amazing, sir. So, your excellent presentation were amazing. So, thank you, sir, for giving us your valuable time and to deliver a great lecture today. Thank you. So, I would like to thank also Dr. Musharraf Hossain Khan, Assistant Professor, Jindal Global University, Haryana, for chairing today's session. We have got sir in our previous lecture session also. Thank you, sir, for being here. I cordially thank all the participants who joined today's lecture throughout the country, I think outside of country also, I believe, and must appreciate their constant interest on BASE lecture series. Thank you all. But last but not the least, I must thank BASE President, Vice President, GS, and all members who are constantly working on it and making this lecture series a success. So thank you all once again. Thank you, Gajendran sir, once again. So I must thank you in German language, I think. That is from my side, danke, or wir dank.
Vielen Dank, yeah. Thank you so much. That's beautiful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Yeah.
So at last, yes, sir. Yes, sir. You are telling anything?
No, nothing else. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so there, at last there is an announcement for our next lecture series number 20. So our next lecture is on how to cope with depression in the context of COVID-19 pandemic by Professor Kalyan Kumar Mukherjee, and he's from Alia University, Kolkata, on 24th July, Friday, 7:30 p.m. onwards. So thank you all, and a special thank to Dr. Gajendran. Thank you.
Super. Thank you so much. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye, sir.
Bye.
Bye, sir.